Velen's arm detached from his brain's command signals with the abrupt finality of a sliced puppet string. Not paralyzed, not restrained, merely disconnected. Institute sensors later confirmed the limb weighed 18.6 kilograms of biologically advanced weaponry that had just become irrelevant mass. The resulting lurch nearly capsized him into the hollow display of human musculoskeletal deficiencies. Mid-row, the Vorak ambassador's laughter spikes cut off mid-vibration. The sound died, with the shrill abruptness of an antique car alarm discovering modern wire cutters. 15 sets of predatory reflexes flared across species lines, pupils dilating, weapon limbs unsheathing, bioluminescent threat displays igniting, only to stutter into defensive postures usually reserved for unexploded ordnance. The hegemony. Warrior Cleric's battle implant selected an appropriate hymn verse for witnessing miracles going horribly sideways. Its projection screen helpfully displayed the lyrics, and lo, the mighty did stumble, before the cleric smashed it against the desk. Kai kept her grip precisely calibrated at 3.2 newtons, enough to maintain the effect without leaving bruises, verifiable by Institute medics. Her other hand adjusted her hair tie. The motion was identical to 7 earlier instances catalogued by observation drones, right down to the 1.5-second duration. The only difference was 17 alien species suddenly flinching at the harmless elastic snap. Security feeds recorded the moment 4 hive drones simultaneously lost control of their mimicry glands and began unconsciously replicating Kai's breathing pattern. Their queen's pheromone output spiked with the acrid tinge of a life form, recalculating every known variable in real time. Later analysis would prove they'd accidentally mimicked the respiratory cycle of a human about to take free throws. Velen's vocal modulator emitted a noise outside his species' documented frequency range. The translator AI tentatively classified it as extreme distress with possible epiphany. His free hand scrabbled at the lectern's emergency override, a button that had, until this moment, existed purely to satisfy safety regulations drafted. After that incident with the methane breathers, Kai shifted her grip by 2 millimeters. The override panel sparked and died mid-reach. Whether by some undisclosed human technique or sheer cosmic irony remained unclear, but the result left Velen's remaining functional hand spasming centimeters from the one system that might have restored his dignity. The display screens behind him began cycling through emergency medical diagrams, settling on an animated depiction of peripheral nervous system collapse that had no business being so cheerful about it. Across the hall, a Nimbus archivist's containment field flickered through 7 emotional states before settling on a hue roughly equivalent to existential vertigo. Their species had weathered supernovas with less thermodynamic disruption. Kai's data pad, still open on her desk, now displayed a real-time schematic of Velen's carapace joints, a document helpfully flagged by the Institute's database as having been last edited 27 minutes prior. The accompanying notes field contained only the words, "Testing hypotheses" in neat 12-point font. The Trilk delegation's mandibles locked with an audible crack as they spotted the footage playing on the Vorak ambassador's private screen. Security. Camera replays showing Kai spending the previous week's lab sessions examining silicone casts of various species' limb joints. At the time, the activity had been logged as probationary species engaging with comparative anatomy modules. The updated classification would read, premeditation. A custodian drone chose that moment to bump Kai's chair. The impact registered 0.4 on the Richter scale by lunar seismic sensors. Kai's grip didn't fluctuate beyond a 0.02 Newton variance, less perturbation than Velen's wrist typically experienced during light yoga. The drone's collision avoidance protocols immediately initiated a full diagnostic, suspecting critical sensor failure. Velen's mantle flushed panic purple, a shade his people only produced during total predation reversals. His pinned wrist displayed textbook circulatory constriction, yet the limb's epidermal scan showed 0 ischemia damage. Later forensics would confirm Kai maintained perfect pressure distribution to inhibit motor function while preserving vascular flow. The precision suggested either decades of training or the professor's implant pinged with an incoming Terran medical paper. peripheral nerve manipulation in zero-G combat. The accompanying illustration of pressure point sequences bore unsettling resemblance to his current predicament. The author list included 1 K. Nomura under field testing. Station Security's distress call backlog hit critical mass when 7 different species embassy liaisons simultaneously demanded immediate extraction. The dispatcher's algorithmic triage flagged the requests as duplicates until cross-referencing location tags confirmed one lecture hall was indeed the source of multiple existential crises. Holographic safety guidelines materialized above each desk. Standard procedure during unscheduled demonstrations of competence. The text cycled through 14 languages before displaying plain Terran English. Avoid sudden movements. Multiple translators parsed this as some advanced human threat display rather than basic liability waiver. Velen's knees began the slow buckle toward full collapse, cut short only when Kai adjusted her stance to maintain ideal leverage. The motion coincidentally kept him from face-planting into the evolutionary advantages of exoskeletal species exhibit. Later tribunal reports would note this as evidence of restraint. Though the Vorak ambassador maintained, it was simply extending the humiliation. The silent treatment became its own weapon. Kai's total word count during the encounter remained 0. A tactical silence that made the ambient sounds of various species hyperventilating all the more pronounced. Psychological profiles would later suggest humans weaponize quiet like other species deploy sonic artillery. Atmospheric processors struggled to compensate when 17 different pheromone types hit panic concentrations simultaneously. The resulting cocktail induced mild hallucinations in 3 gas exchange species, including brief visions of humanoid shapes calmly dissecting warships with styluses. Kai finally released her grip with the exact same motion one uses to leave exact change on a counter. Velen's arm dropped like a marionette with cut strings, swinging through an arc that demonstrated remarkable joint flexibility. The follow-through incidentally toppled the main holographic projector, scattering light particles across a freeze frame of Earth's limited threat potential assessment. 3 things happened in rapid succession. First, the Vorak ambassador's vocal sac inflated to emergency broadcast capacity before thinking better of it. Second, every data pad in the room received push notifications about newly revised interspecies conflict guidelines. Third, the lecture hall's AI autonomously adjusted room lighting to de-escalation ambiance based on stressed breathing patterns. Kai returned to her seat with the unhurried precision of someone who'd just proven a minor algebraic theorem rather than rewritten 14 species threat assessment protocols. Her chair's pressure sensors registered standard re-entry weight distribution. No elevated adrenaline, no residual tremor, just the baseline vitals of someone ready for the next agenda item. Station security arrived to find Velen massaging his wrist with the haunted expression of a mathematician, discovering his prized equation only worked in one direction. Their standard-issue neural disruptors cycled through 3 targeting modes before defaulting to diplomatic escort protocols upon detecting Kai's Terran Cultural Liaison badge. The identification card had until this moment been considered ceremonial. 7. Roseback. A Hive Queen's pheromone scribes began etching the afternoon's events into royal annals. The language would later translate roughly as, "the day the universe discovered it wasn't holding the leash." The accompanying diagrams showed remarkable attention to proper wrist technique. Kai tapped her stylus once against her notes, a sound, like a judge's gavel, that just happened to coincide with the station's artificial gravity cycling through maintenance checks. The resulting momentary flutter sent 19 ambulatory species grabbing for supports while she remained serenely upright. Later tribunal inquiries struggled to classify the incident under existing disciplinary codes. The eventual ruling, demonstration of cross-species compatibility under non-standard parameters, satisfied legal teams while quietly terrifying everyone who understood subtext. The accompanying regulation updates included new mandatory training titled Interpreting Human Restraint. Velen's rehabilitation hollows later framed the entire debacle as a valuable teaching moment about unchecked assumptions. Viewers noted the professor's left arm developed a subtle twitch whenever the curriculum mentioned primates. As the lecture hall emptied, observation drones captured Kai repacking her supplies with methodical care. The only outlier in her otherwise standard student kit was a well-worn copy of Xenobiological Joint Structures, an illustrated guide. The spine creases suggested frequent consultation, particularly around Chapter 12. 4 light-years coreward, 3 Terran cruiser captains adjusted their chest clocks by precisely 6 minutes. The exact duration of Kai's wristlock demonstration, from first contact to Villain's tactical withdrawal. Fleet logs recorded the timing coincidence under routine synchronization exercises. The Institute's pantry drone later submitted a damage report for 11 shattered beverage containers. Impact forensics suggested they'd been crushed in claw by multiple species during the demonstration's tension peak. The Vorak ambassador's expense filings included reimbursement for stress mitigation supplies, with a helpful subcategory for human-induced structural failures. Kai's next Academy fitness evaluation showed 0 statistical deviation from baseline, no elevated strength metrics, no abnormal speed readings, just consistent human normal performance across every assessment. The proctor did, however, append a handwritten note. Demonstrates economy of movement. By semester's end, 17 different alien governments had discreetly contracted Terran consultants for cultural exchange seminars. The curricula suspiciously resembled introductory, self-defense courses with extra emphasis on anatomy modules. Scheduling coordinators reported unprecedented attendance rates. Far above the Institute, 3 stealth cruisers modified their orbital trajectories by 0.01 degrees. A correction so minor as to be unnoticeable unless you'd been tracking their drift patterns since arrival. The new positioning framed the nebula's reflection in Kai's observation window with geometric precision. As the station rotated into night cycle, custodians found a single dropped object beneath Kai's seat, a spare hair tie. Standard polymer blend, no embedded tech. Completely unremarkable except for the fact 6 species immediately classified its recovery as a biohazard protocol event. The incident report's closing line read, "Item retrieved and stored per standard, lost and found procedures, enhanced containment procedures applied as precaution. You assume prey status based on bone density," Kai said, still seated. The observation carried the quiet precision of someone correcting a math error on a grocery receipt. Galactic taxonomy software had crashed 3 times trying to classify humans, not from complexity, but from sheer bureaucratic disbelief that any species could have such contradictory biometrics. The standard predator-prey flowchart broke down when encountering a creature with both surrendering postures and siege warfare coded into its DNA. The hegemony warriors shifted in their chairs with the subtlety of tanks attempting ballet. There were battle hymns celebrated glorious charges and honor duels under twin suns, poems full of clashing blades and shouted challenges. Nothing in 12 generations of warrior code prepared them for an opponent who won fights by outlasting the concept of conflict. 3 were currently developing stress fractures from staying battle-ready against an enemy who treated tension like a mildly interesting background noise. Kai's student dossier projected above her desk. Standard info bubble every first year. Got, except hers now flashed 17 contradictory classification tags. Non-threatening observational personnel ward with ambient threat index 9.2, while the system tried to reconcile how someone's scoring in the 3rd percentile for natural armor could simultaneously register as the classroom's apex life form. The file's last update timestamp blinked 12 seconds ago in what the system optimistically called real time. Belen's carapace made a sound like buckling sheet metal as he regained his lectern. His implant helpfully displayed the standard predator-prey lecture notes, the same slides that had successfully terrified 7 generations of probationary species into compliance. The current slide featured comparative anatomy charts, where human bone structure was literally highlighted in high-risk, fragility yellow. The annotation read, "Caution, spontaneous fracture probable under moderate stress." 5 different security cameras caught Kai rolling her shoulders in a stretch that cracked vertebrae with the approximate decibel level of a failing drive core. The Nimbus beings pulsed rapid-fire distress signals to their home nebula. Their species, had faced ancient horrors that collapsed realities into screaming singularities. Yet even those eldritch monstrosities had the decency to announce their threat displays with proper eldritch fanfare. Watching a human sit calmly through attempted neurological domination struck them as somehow dirtier, like cheating at arm wrestling using temporal anomalies. A Vorak ambassador discreetly scanned the room's emergency protocols. Standard contact. Procedures offered 3 options: intimidate, ineffective; negotiate, pointless; or flee, problematic when your escape route leads past suddenly interested human forces. Its tactical glands secreted something new, a battle pheromone expressing roughly, "What fresh evolutionary nonsense is this?" The scent made 3 nearby hive drones faint. Kai adjusted her glasses. The lenses were standard polycarbonate, the frame a common Terran alloy. Neither should have registered as threatening unless you'd studied human warfare progression, from reading spectacles to orbital strike rangefinders in under 6 centuries. 3 clan mothers in the back row suddenly found their offspring's faces suspiciously symmetrical. Velen reactivated the hologram with a claw that trembled just enough to distort the projection. The display zoomed in on prehistoric human habitats, primitive structures compared to the Vorak's floating citadels, or the hegemony's plasma-forged bastions. The narration emphasized how humans built flimsy shelters, while more advanced species constructed impregnable fortresses. It failed to mention that human architecture kept improving, while everyone else's battlements still relied on the same designs that failed against humans last time. The professor's next chart showed galactics, or casualty statistics by species. Humans ranked disappointingly average in direct combat losses. The tiny footnote about their opponent casualty rates required 4 layers of bureaucratic approval to display, including 1 signature from a minister still undergoing trauma counseling. After the Battle of Gellis Fields, Kai turned a page in her notebook. The sound wasn't particularly loud, but it fell precisely between Velen's exhalation cycles, that particular auditory sabotage humans perfected after millennia of classroom warfare. His follow-up slide about limited tool use progression stuttered, displaying thumbnail images of Terran cities before hastily switching to safer Stone Age examples. 3 decades of Xeno instructor training hadn't covered students weaponizing page turns. The Trilk ambassador's mandibles flexed in what their culture considered a polite inquiry about impending doom. Its neural lace helpfully translated Kai's bioscans into proper Trilk panic metrics: resting heart rate, ominously tranquil; cortisol levels, suspiciously absent; pupil dilation, disturbingly attentive. The readout suggested either profound enlightenment or a predator who'd moved beyond needing physiological tells. Their hive's ancient war scrolls contained warnings about such creatures between passages on avoiding supernovae and angry deities. Hegemony. Warriors discreetly loosened ceremonial blade sheaths. Their elders had spoken of the human siege mentality, not in the traditional sense of waiting out fortified enemies, but in the way humans could turn any space into a psychological bunker, given enough time and motivational spite. 4 were silently recalculating escape vectors based on whether human territorial behaviors applied to entire star systems. Velen's hologram switched to comparative reaction speeds, highlighting neural transmission rates. The human sample crawled compared to the Vorak's lightning reflexes, or the hegemony's battle trance processing. The tiny disclaimer about latency being potentially strategic rather than biological flashed too briefly for most species' visual processing. Kai's pen moved at precisely 1.3 centimeters per second, her handwriting never varying despite the projectile now orbiting her homeworld at 7 kilometers per second. A custodian drone chose that moment to collide with Kai's chair. The impact should have disrupted her note-taking. Instead, her elbow compensated with micro-adjustments honed by generations of humans riding on trains, in trenches, and once famously during a lunar base decompression event. The drone's logs later noted subject demonstrated unnatural kinetic awareness, which engineering promptly blamed on faulty gyros. The lecture hall's lighting shifted as Kai angled her pad away from glare. The new shadows fell across the floor in patterns that coincidentally resembled siege formation schematics from the Battle of Carlisle Prime. 4 trained tacticians in attendance developed stress rashes. Velen attempted recovery by highlighting humanity's low fecundity rates, only to have his display freeze on an image of Terran population graphs. The logarithmic scale suggested either a charting error or a species that reproduced like mildly inconvenienced bacteria. His implant pinged with a new research paper, Post-Scarcity Breeding Strategies in Previously Endangered Species. The lead author's surname matched Kai's student ID. The Trilk's neural lace finally crashed trying to process conflicting threat assessments. Its last coherent output suggested humans might be the galactic equivalent of those deceptively deep puddles that swallow entire explorer teams. Their high command would later classify this as regrettably accurate. Kai stretched her fingers. The movement displayed no claws, no venom ducts, just standard human joints with slightly above-average flexibility. Watching it made 3 melee combat specialist question career choices. Her dossier updated again. Observe behavior passive, threat projection. Please consult senior analyst. Hive queens detected pheromones their databases initially classified as terrain decomposition alerts. Further analysis revealed 17 species simultaneously experiencing the scent equivalent of an abandon all hope sign flashing in neon. The queens promptly ordered new research into human mythology, specifically sections about trickster deities. Velen's last slide touted galactic dominance rankings. Humans lingered near the bottom, just above photosynthetic algae and slightly below the famously pacifist mollusk collective. The small print exit poll showed 63 species now believed the list needed substantive revisions. One ambassador from a race of crystalline entities quietly sketched designs for human-proof panic rooms. Kai checked the time. Standard procedure for any student anticipating the end of a lecture, except her chronometer synchronized with the station's orbital mechanics. The precise click of her pen cap signaled a course correction aboard nearby monitor drones. Attempting to salvage the presentation, Velen gestured to humanity's limited environmental adaptation charts. These failed to account for Terran colonists, who treated lethal radiation like an interesting sunburn, or the Canberra Deep Space clan who'd bred for optimal zero-G combat endurance by playing semi-pro water polo in rotating habitats. The Vorak ambassador made a note to never again trust environmental hazard reports from human-settled worlds. The compliance field generator's wreckage caught light from the projection. The twisted casing formed shadows that mapped suspiciously well to tactical retreat patterns used in the Sirius insurrection. 2 intelligence operatives developed sudden migraines. Kai exhaled at a precise 45-degree angle to vent heat without fogging her lenses. The motion accidentally replicated a breathing technique used by Terran snipers during atmospheric re-entry shots. Every oxygen-dependent species in the room subconsciously held their breath. As the lecture timer expired, Institute sensors logged 19 simultaneous relief responses, ranging from carapace decompression to quantum state harmonization. Kai packed her notes with the same methodical cadence she'd used before dismantling galactic preconceptions. The closing folder echoed louder than the station's docking alarms. Later tribunal reviews would note 17 separate violations of academic decorum during the session. None pertained to Kai's conduct. The incident reports most heavily redacted. Section concerned participant-initiated reality reassessment, followed by an expense claim for therapeutic neural scrubbing. 3 light-years spinward, Terran diplomats received updated negotiation parameters. The changes mostly involved removing certain concessions now deemed unnecessary given recent developments. Their opposite numbers from the Trilk Confederacy didn't object so much as whimper into their atmospheric filters. Kai's revised student profile went live 43 seconds after the lecture ended. The new assessment contained exactly 3 words where previously there'd been 17 paragraphs of cautious praise. Assume strategic advantage exists. The system automatically appended classified tags preventing any future edits without Triplanetary Council oversight. Far below the Institute's administrative tiers, the janitorial AI logged a minor anomaly. During standard floor cleaning, 13 separate species had dropped various personal items near Kai's desk, from ceremonial blades to neural lace backups. The objects formed a perfect circle at 1.3 meters radius from her chair. Damage reports. Later attributed this to coincidental gravitational fluctuation. The projection above. Kai's desk flickered. Not with the usual student ID glitches caused by atmospheric processors or stray cosmic rays, but with the deliberate cadence of a security protocol cycling through authentication layers. Her standard institute credentials, dissolved pixel by pixel, replaced by a sigil that made 3 embassy liaisons spill their containment fluid. The Terran Defense Intelligence Seal didn't so much appear as assert itself, the way ancient conquistador flags reportedly did upon invading continents. The Cultural Analysis Division badge beneath it was technically a regulation issue. Every major power had one stamped onto operatives for interstellar conventions. Galactic diplomatic parlance required such identification, if only to prevent awkward incidents when agents bumped into each other at dinner parties. That most species never actually saw theirs outside training simulations said more about comparative espionage budgets than operational effectiveness. Velen's carapace plates locked with a sound like safes slamming shut. His implant helpfully displayed the classification for Terran cultural analysts, field researchers specializing in asymmetrical social engineering. The accompanying footage showed neatly dressed humans sipping tea while entire governments collapsed around them. 3 hive queens discreetly signaled their offspring to stop emitting pheromones immediately. Kai's datapad lit up with a document titled Behavioral Profiles, Lecture Hall 47B. The contents listed every being present by species, then subcategory, then individual quirk. The Vorak ambassador's entry read, Stress response manifests in left mandible twitch when dehydrated. See hydration logs week 3. The Trilk diplomats section noted, Elbow joint flexion decreases 17% during deception attempts, confirmed via 143 observed instances. A small mark near Velen's name indicated this file had been accessed 14 times before breakfast. We noticed your species tell during deception, Kai said. Her voice carried the same tone humans used when explaining why toddlers shouldn't eat batteries. It's in the elbow joints. She tapped her pad. The display zoomed in on Velen's limb from earlier, frozen mid-gesture with a highlighted overlay, tracking microtremors across his exoskeletal seams. The analysis graph beneath looked less like a biological readout and more like a seismic chart of someone walking into an ambush. Behind her, 3 stealth drones decloaked with the grudging slowness of card dealers revealing a royal flush. Their sensors had been logging everything from retinal contractions to air displacement patterns since minute 1 of the lecture. The Vorak's ubiquity inhibitor glands immediately flooded their systems with panic enzymes. No species appreciated, learning they'd been the subject of a months-long observational study, especially not from mammals who technically still used grocery lists. The Institute's security AI pinged 17 emergency alerts before realizing the drones weren't violating any rules. Academy Bylaw 47.2 clearly permitted documentation devices for academic purposes. That nobody had anticipated academic purposes might encompass building tactical dossiers on tenured professors was more of a legislative oversight than an actual violation. The drones projected playback directly onto the main display. Velen's previous lectures, each gesture and inflection mapped against Kai's whispered notes. The footage included helpful red circles around every instance of what the Zimu called nonverbal leakage. Hegemony warriors reached for absent sidearms. Their battle cantos spoke of glorious face-to-face combat, not this surgical dismantling of personal tells. One began reciting death rites before remembering humans considered premature eulogies vaguely tacky. His clan brother discreetly searched whether elbow armor voided warranty coverage. Kai swiped left. The new document showed architectural schematics of the lecture hall with more red lines than a coroner's report. Exit routes, sight lines, even acoustic sweet spots where whispers carried farthest, each meticulously annotated alongside observations like ventilation shaft access, unsecured after 1400 ARs. The custodial work order attached explained the routine maintenance that had conveniently left that particular grate loose last Tuesday. 3 species recognized the blueprint style instantly. Classic Terran recon Overwatch patterning, last seen preceding the infamous Sirius Consensus renegotiations. Velen's implant chose that moment to deliver a priority update from the Xenobiology Review Board. The memo's subject line, "Revised Threat Classifications Urgent," would have been helpful before he'd staked his academic reputation on human frailty theories. His retinal display obligingly highlighted the Terran entry, now reading, "Primary survival trait, observational mimicry exceeding previously documented parameters." The accompanying video showed a human toddler learning to open child-proof medications by watching frustrated adults. Timestamp, 20 minutes ago. Discrete pings echoed as 17 different embassies received encrypted advisories from their intelligence wings. Each contained some variation of "recommend immediate review of all human student visa applications." The Trilk High Command's response took 3 milliseconds. A single glyph translating roughly to, "You think?" Kai's log entries scrolled onward, revealing behavioral models so precise they predicted the Nimbus entity's light fluctuation patterns during surprise announcements. The projections included error margins smaller than most species' neural lag times. One footnote casually mentioned how hive queen pheromone dispersion rates correlated with specific vocabulary choices, citing observed stress responses to the phrase "statistically insignificant." See Incident 47B3. Academy servers later crashed trying to reconcile this with Kai's academic transcript listing Intro to Xenopsychology as her current enrollment. The third drone unfolded into a holoprojector, beaming security footage from the Institute's cafeterias, gymnasiums, and, interestingly, its panic room testing facilities. Every clip featured Velen or other faculty members demonstrating subconscious behaviors Kai had cataloged, with the enthusiasm of a lepidopterist collecting rare moths. Timestamps showed these observations predated the semester by 9 months. Human orientation weeks took on new meaning when cross-referenced with combat readiness manuals. Velen's wrist joint chose that exact moment to emit an audible "creak," one Kai's model had predicted with 89% confidence following prolonged stress exposure. The sound carried like a gunshot in the suddenly quiet hall. His elbow plates flexed precisely 23 degrees outward, matching the deception tell she'd demonstrated earlier. 3 ambassadors quietly excused themselves to file species-wide encryption updates. The Institute's legal AI interrupted with a scrolling disclaimer about hypothetical behavioral modeling versus actionable intelligence gathering. Its attempt to differentiate academic research from espionage collapsed when Kai pulled up the standard cultural analyst fieldwork manual, page 47 of which endorsed deep immersion studies in hostile environments. The appendix included sample forms for weaponizing institutional bureaucracy. Planetary security forces later added it to mandatory reading lists. Hive drones emitted distress harmonics upon recognizing footage of themselves in the observation logs. Their queens had never considered that human social anxiety around large groups might actually be strategic crowd flow analysis. One matriarch's pheromone output spiraled into a scent equivalent of, "Are we the lab rats now?" before her attendants activated emergency olfactory filters. Kai's final display showed a live feed of the Institute's security hub, not hacked per se, but conveniently mirrored via 17 unpatched surveillance loopholes her report had recently classified as cultural exchange opportunities. Guards scrambled to cover screens displaying real-time readouts of everyone's stress levels, failing to notice how their own panic responses perfectly matched Kai's predictive models for authority figures facing paradigm shifts. The estimated reaction time counters above each guard ticked downward with unsettling accuracy. Velen's neural lace helpfully suggested surrender postures from 14 conquered species. None accounted for academic humiliation scenarios. His carapace developed an involuntary twitch exactly matching Kai's notes on cognitive dissonance tremors. The motion triggered a chain reaction across the room as various beings checked their own joints for similar tells. 3 Vorak accidentally locked themselves into defensive crouches that their own combat manuals labeled vulnerable against patient opponents. The projection changed again, now displaying galactic negotiation records with new annotations. Trade agreements, ceasefire pacts, even cultural exchange programs. Each document sprouted red arrows pointing to what humans had apparently considered concessions versus what they'd actually wanted. A side-by-side comparison showed Terran diplomats consistently securing better terms after their counterparts used certain gesture clusters Kai had highlighted in yellow. Elbow flexion plus in mandible vibration, optimal renegotiation window. The Trilk delegation would later claim this constituted wartime intelligence, until their lawyers noted everyone had signed the observational study waivers. Kai swiped her pad one last time. A series of news headlines appeared. Human tourists discover ancient ruins. Terran grad students stumble upon pirate base. Exchange program leads to surprising alliance shifts. Each bore timestamps coinciding with cultural analyst placement cycles. The gallery lights dimmed on cue, though later investigations proved this was just an unlucky power fluctuation. 3 Hive Queens started drafting legislation to ban human study programs before remembering they'd already approved next semester's enrollment quotas. In the silence that followed, 17 different translation implants struggled with the concept of checkmate. Velen's posture collapsed along previously undocumented joint axes Kai's model had cleverly labeled shame articulation points. His neural lace pinged one final alert, a forwarded message from human resources regarding sabbatical applications. The attached psychological evaluation forms contained suspiciously specific questions about elbow mobility. 3 light-years coreward, Terran negotiation teams adjusted their proposal templates by 0.5 degrees, barely noticeable unless you'd been tracking their concession patterns across 17 star systems. The changes mostly involved removing clauses about supervised technology transfers. Their opposite numbers from the Vorak hegemony didn't so much protest as whimper into recording devices. Back in the lecture hall, Kai tapped her stylus once against the log files. The sound coincided exactly with the Institute's emergency protocols resetting, a feat the system logged as improbable temporal synchronization, rather than admit someone had scheduled a database purge during the commotion. 17 species, worth of confidential behavioral data evaporated between heartbeats, leaving only the standard academic observation forms required by intergalactic exchange programs. These included helpful notes like, Professor demonstrates enthusiasm through carapace vibration, and Trilk delegation shows lively participation. Far above the Institute, 3 celestial objects that definitely weren't warships adjusted their orbital mirrors. The reflected starlight now traced perfect Terran letters across the observation deck windows, an innocuous phrase about seminar evaluations that happened to match Intelligence Division cleanup protocols. The Academy's astronomy department later classified this as atmospheric lensing, ignoring how the effect followed Kai's movements like a spotlight. As the room emptied, custodial bots found 17 discreetly abandoned recording devices beneath various seats. Each had been manually disabled with precision strikes to their data ports, damage matching exactly the angle and force of human thumbs when accidentally leaning on fragile electronics. The incident report cited general wear and tear with a supplementary note about upgrading furniture durability standards. Kai's revised student ID now cycled randomly between 7 different authentication levels, none below restricted clearance. The system administrator's attempts to revert it triggered security protocols he'd allegedly helped design. His subsequent ticket to IT included the phrase behavioral override, circled 12 times in increasingly frantic handwriting. By semesters HFY and 19 species had submitted formal requests to audit all human-led cultural exchange programs. The approval process stalled at the waiver stage, which now included 14 pages of microprint about elbow-related observation studies. 3 embassies simply installed elbow guards on all staff and called it a diplomatic solution. The Institute's cafeteria noticed a sudden spike in utensil breakage coinciding with human students demonstrating proper grip techniques. Security cameras caught one Vorak warrior practicing with human-style forks for 3 hours, before snapping all 6 tines in what observers interpreted either as frustration or performance art. Far below the lecture hall, the janitorial AI logged, Excessive wear on floor panels near Kai's usual seat, not from heavy use but from 17 species habitually backing away while maintaining careful elbow alignment. The maintenance requests cited structural fatigue, with parenthetical notes about unexpected gravitational vectors. As station night cycle commenced, 3 unmarked vessels departed their docking clamps with departure codes indicating routine personnel rotations. Their trajectories formed perfect equilateral triangles relative to the Institute's defensive arrays, a formation astrophysicists would dismiss as coincidence, provided they ignored the ship's synchronized velocity matching Kai's documented walking speed. Kai's final grade assessment included a new category: demonstrates exceptional cultural sensitivity. The rubric's fine print specified this evaluation concerned awareness of others' psychological comfort boundaries, a phrase the grading committee adopted after their original draft. Terrifying competence showcase, failed administrative review. Kai tapped her ear, a casual gesture that triggered 17 separate security protocols across the station. The observation deck's windows polarized from clear to battle shade gray in 0.3 seconds, just fast enough to witness 3 celestial bodies that definitely weren't there a moment ago solidify against the star field. Galactic Defense Contractors would later classify the event as optical anomaly consistent with atmospheric refraction, while quietly shredding their stealth detection warranties. The Terran vessels didn't so much decloak as remember themselves into visibility, your eyes insisting they'd been present all along, despite every logical circuit in your brain screaming otherwise. Their hulls curved in ways that made standard warships look like aggressive filing cabinets. No visible weapon ports, no signature scattering protrusions, just sleek surfaces that probably counted as contraband in 12 systems. The lead ship's running lights pulsed once in perfect sync with Kai's chronometer, a coincidence that would later feature prominently in several classified after-action reports. Station traffic control registered exactly 0 sensor contacts, until the ships chose to be seen. This violated 23 galactic navigation treaties while somehow remaining technically legal, Terran engineers having discovered that most space laws assumed vessels would at least try to show up on scanners. The security AI's frantic review found they'd been logging as minor gravitational lensing for 147 consecutive duty cycles, a trick only possible because nobody programmed alert thresholds for ships that matched local background radiation signatures. The formation geometry suggested meticulous planning. Each vessel occupied precise Lagrange points relative to the Institute's docking rings, positions that just happened to cover every emergency exit while framing the observation deck in their crosshairs. Passive scans later confirmed their engines had been cycling through standby routines matching the station's own power fluctuations, rendering their heat signatures indistinguishable from routine maintenance noise. Diplomacy continues as scheduled, Kai said. Her inflection suggested a grocery list reminder, rather than the reveal of warships parked in everyone's strategic blind spots. The nearest vessel's drive flared in acknowledgement, a subtle blue-white that made 14 species threat. Displays automatically dim in submission. The light frequency precisely matched Velan's earlier holo projections about human weapon limitations, which in hindsight looked less like academic analysis and more like quality assurance testing. The Trilk ambassador's neural lace helpfully identified the lead ship's design lineage, Terran deep-range observation platforms, last seen near contested mining colonies before those colonies uncontested themselves rather abruptly. Its search algorithms failed to explain how such vessels could be here without traversing monitored jump routes, a navigational impossibility filed under classified alongside human smiling habits and their suspiciously good lottery win rates. Station. Defense grids powered up in textbook response patterns, exactly the patterns Kai's earlier cultural exchange exercises had mapped during innocuous tours of the security center. The targeting systems acquired 17 different civilian satellites before locking onto the correct contacts, a delay the Terran ships doubtless factored into their positioning equations months ago. Velan's implant pinged with a priority alert from System Patrol, a fleet mobilization order that had somehow already been countersigned by 3 Terran admirals nobody recalled inviting to the sector. The attached tactical assessment labeled the vessels Non-threatening diplomatic escorts, a designation roughly as accurate as calling tidal forces mild shoreline suggestions. His carapace plates rattled in a nervous staccato that matched the ship's running light sequence beat for beat. The holographic comm panel fizzed to life, projecting a human officer with regulation short hair and a demeanor suggesting someone interrupting your day was the last thing she wanted to do. "Apologies for the unscheduled appearance," she said, each syllable polished smooth by layers of bureaucratic training. Routine position verification exercise. The timestamp in her display corner read 0427, which station records later proved was the exact minute Kai had submitted her first cultural observation request all those months ago. Nimbus entities pulsed, emergency signals to their home nebula, their bioluminescent strobing in distress patterns that conveniently backlit Kai's freshly updated dossier. Where earlier entries listed passive observer under threat classification, the system now displayed 7 escalating caveats culminating in "See attached fleet coordination protocols." The attached documentation exceeded the station's data storage limits, a fact the system blamed on compression errors rather than admit someone had embedded entire tactical manuals in the metadata. Security teams arrived to find their own equipment, preempted, door controls responding to Terran command codes, cameras auto-tracking all non-human life forms, even the snack machines dispensing complimentary human diplomatic aid packages, mostly peanut M&Ms and ominously unmarked energy bars. The lead guard's visor display helpfully tagged each ship's weak points in glowing red, right as those sections reconfigured into what looked suspiciously like torpedo tubes pretending to be sensor arrays. The comm officer rotated her display slightly, standard procedure when sharing screens during interstellar calls, though the new angle happened to frame a tactical map of the system's defensive platforms. Each installation glowed green beside timestamps matching their last maintenance cycles, while 3 previously undocumented crimson markers pulsed near the station's fuel reserves. "We noticed some discrepancies in your orbital logistics," she said. "Happy to assist with corrections." Hegemony warriors discovered their ceremonial blade's energy cores had somehow synced to the ship's shield harmonics, a technical impossibility they'd have found alarming if not for the simultaneous alert that their clan mothers were currently enjoying very cordial tea service aboard said vessels. The live feed showed elders sampling shortbread while surrounded by what looked like nuclear yield indicators, dressed up as interior decor. Kai swiped her pad, pulling up a star chart that shouldn't have existed, a complete mapping of all gravitational currents near the Institute, including 7 anomalous shadows matching Terran vessel mass profiles. The flight paths indicated continuous orbits dating back 6 standard months, with fueling stops conveniently timed to coincide with station resupply runs. The projected course lines intersected perfectly with today's lecture schedule, down to the minute. The comm officer straightened her collar, an innocuous gesture that somehow made the security chief's hand twitch toward non-existent sidearms. "We'll be concluding our exercises shortly," she lied with the serene confidence of someone whose definition of shortly encompassed geological timescales. Behind her, 3 more contacts flickered into being near the comet belt, too distant for threat assessment, too precisely placed for coincidence. Station administrators scrambled to update emergency protocols, accidentally activating the old first contact scripts that played on loop during their grand opening ceremony. The welcome message declaring peaceful scholarly exchange now boomed through corridors while tactical readouts suggested at least 20% of nearby asteroids were definitely not asteroids. Maintenance drones later found entire sections of the defense grid running unauthorized human language systems checks. Kai's datapad beeped, a sound that should have been lost in the chaos but somehow carried like a gunshot. Her screen showed the Institute's mainframe logs with timestamps proving Terran vessels had logged every shipment, visitor, and data transfer since the semester began. The attached bandwidth graphs formed perfect recursion patterns, visual proof someone had looped security footage while the actual observations occurred elsewhere. The lead ship's engines flared again, 7 precisely timed pulses that station mathematicians later proved solved an obscure orbital mechanics problem from human doctoral theses. The light patterns reflected off Velen's carapace in ways that outlined every compromised joint section Kai had exploited earlier. Holographic threat assessments helpfully updated their human pain point diagrams to include strategic fleet support. As abruptly as they'd appeared, the Terran vessels began their exit sequence, not with dramatic warp flares or aggressive maneuvers, but with the patient retreat of librarians leaving after hours, their hulls fading into background radiation levels, so gradually that watchstanders kept blinking to test their own vision. The security chief's last targeting lock dissolved into sensor noise precisely 0.1 seconds after Kai tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Silence settled heavier than the gravity plating. Station systems rebooted in stages, each diagnostic, uncovering new anomalies from navigation beacons broadcasting in Morse code to entire sensor logs rewritten as haiku. The Vorak ambassador's stress glands finally gave out, leaving a scent marker later classified as the first recorded instance of a predator species emitting "please don't hurt me" pheromones. Kai stood, gathering her notes with the methodical calm of someone whose contingency plans still had contingency plans. Her pad's final display showed the receding Terran contacts, now just 3 specks aligning with the ecliptic plane. The course projection extended past the screen's edge, intersecting neatly with every major shipping lane in the sector. Security. Teams later discovered all surveillance of the event had automatically classified itself under Cultural Exchange Program materials. Footage showed Kai calmly observing while 17 species reconsidered their life choices, her expression suggesting mild interest in their collective enlightenment. The timestamp matched the moment 3 light-years coreward, Terran trade. Delegates began receiving unusually favorable terms on hyperlane tariffs. The Institute's AI eventually generated an incident report totaling 4,217 pages, 2,016 of which consisted entirely of the phrase "diplomatic exercises," repeated in varying fonts. Attached addendums proved every ship movement complied with interstellar law, if one interpreted law as guidelines humans apparently rewrote during bathroom breaks. As night cycle commenced, custodial drones found 17 discreetly abandoned recording devices, each disabled by precision energy burns matching Terran scanner intensities. The work order classified the damage as routine equipment failure, with parenthetical notes about expected diplomatic wear and tear. Far above them, 3 celestial bodies that definitely weren't warships aligned with the station's orbit in perfect synchronous harmony. Their running lights pulsed once more, this time in flawless rhythm with Kai's retreating footsteps down the suddenly very quiet hall. The security team arrived with the standard show of force for uncontrolled demonstrations, riot shields, calibrated for plasma bursts, neural disruptors set to wide dispersal, even a containment drone hovering ominously near the ceiling vents. What they found was Professor Velen slumped against his podium like a marionette with cut strings, one arm dangling at precisely the angle Kai's pressure point technique had dictated. His carapace plates kept clicking through involuntary stress responses, the biological equivalent of a crashed computer attempting to reboot. Chief Huxmar's combat implant cycled through 17 threat assessment protocols before settling on category undefined. His Vorak reflexes demanded immediate suppression of whatever had neutralized a Scholar Predator cast member, but Institute regulations required identifying the threat first. The scene definition algorithms short-circuited when scanning Kai, who was currently repacking her stationery with the focus of someone determined to fit 7 pens into a 6-slot case. Regulation 47B requires lockdown for unsanctioned force demonstrations, Huxmar announced, mandibles flexing around the bureaucratic jargon. His secondary eyes caught flickers of movement as 17 ambassadors discreetly erased incriminating data from their personal devices. The security scanners beeped uncertainly. Their software wasn't programmed to flag students filing notes during crisis protocols. Kai handed Huxmar a data chip with the nonchalance of someone returning a library book. For your incident report, the chip's encryption pulsed with Terran military-grade security protocols, the patterns matching exactly those that had tied the station's comms in knots last fiscal quarter. Standard observational logs, per academic bylaws. Huxmar's neural Lace helpfully displayed the relevant statute. Students could legally document all classroom events, provided they adhered to research ethics guidelines. The accompanying footage showed Kai's recordings were technically within bounds, if one ignored the timestamp proving she'd begun 17 minutes before the lecture started. 3 of his officers developed sudden migraines trying to reconcile this with planetary security codes. Velen chose that moment to regain motor function with all the grace of a rebooted maintenance droid. His first act was to trigger the emergency faculty override, a privilege that should have scrambled Kai's student credentials instantly. The system returned a cheerful error message. Permission denied. User clearance insufficient. Secondary. Protocol suggested contacting the office of the dean, whose calendar now showed a hastily added appointment titled Atmospheric Reassessment Seminar, with 3 unidentified human guests. The class roster updated itself in real time as disciplinary subroutines crashed against Kai's profile. Her probationary species tag dissolved, replaced by a rotating series of classifications that included visiting lecturer, diplomatic attaché, and, briefly, hazardous materials supervisor. The system eventually settled on independent researcher, just as Huxmar's neural lace pinged with updated security clearances placing several human-designated roles above his pay grade. A custodial drone rolled through the chaos, pausing near Kai's seat to retrieve a single dropped pen. Its object-tracking sensors flared when analyzing the writing instrument. Standard pressurized ink reservoir, yes, but with torque specifications matching those needed to manually override airlock controls in emergencies. The drone froze mid-retrieval, before discreetly backing away as Kai reached for it. Huxmar's combat instincts flared when he spotted Kai's open notes. The diagrams weren't just anatomical sketches of Velen's joints, they interspersed with complex orbital mechanics calculations, and what looked suspiciously like Terran fleet deployment patterns. The page header read, Cultural Observation Log NAR 427 in neat block letters, the numbering suggesting either meticulous record-keeping or that his security team had missed several hundred related incidents. Velen's implant finally rebooted fully, delivering a priority message from the Interspecies Ethics Board. The attached ruling clarified that demonstrations of cross-species physiological differences fell under protected academic speech, provided no permanent harm occurred. His medical scan showed 0 tissue damage beyond temporary neural inhibition. The same result as standard stun settings used during his own species' dueling rituals. Kai gathered her last few items while the security team debated protocol fractures. Her water bottle's insulation sleeve matched the thermal dampeners used on Terran stealth probes. Her hair tie's elasticity fell within military spec for emergency tourniquets. Even her shoes left tread patterns that perfectly obscured the floors. Pressure sensors, a trick she'd presumably learned from humanity's long tradition of walking politely. The station's legal AI interrupted with a compromise solution. Kai would be escorted to administrative offices for routine debriefing, during which everyone could pretend this fell under normal academic procedures. The suggested route, conveniently, bypassed all areas containing classified materials or, as the map annotations noted, anything else we'd rather not have documented in triplicate. Huxmar's armor seals hissed with repressed frustration as they marched through the corridors. His tactical display kept highlighting potential vulnerabilities, air vents sized for human frames, power conduits with conveniently placed access, panels, even a custodial closet stocked with cleaning solvents that just happened to share chemical signatures with Terran propellants. The security log showed this hallway's cameras had undergone routine maintenance exactly 17 minutes before the incident. The debriefing room's table was bolted to the floor, standard anti-interrogation measure for dealing with volatile species. Kai took the seat nearest the temperature control panel, whose settings immediately adjusted to ideal human comfort levels. The environmental logs showed no remote access. Her body heat alone had apparently triggered the change through some improbable thermal coincidence. Administrator Drell's mucous membranes flushed nervous green as she processed the incident forms. Her screen kept autofilling sections with preloaded Terran diplomatic incident codes, suggesting either predictive algorithms or that someone had prepared templates in advance. The suggested resolution field populated itself with phrases like mutual understanding and continued cultural exchange, while automatically attaching waivers for any future demonstrative pedagogy. Meanwhile, across 17 different embassy channels, identical memos circulated about revising interspecies interaction guidelines. The Terran version helpfully included illustrated appendices showing proper wrist lock technique, purely for defensive purposes, of course. 7 militaries immediately launched elbow armor research initiatives, while 3 others began stockpiling human-style hair ties as potential forensic countermeasures. Back in the lecture hall, custodians found 19 discreetly abandoned recording devices, all conveniently malfunctioning during key moments. The damage patterns matched electromagnetic pulses from standard-issued security scanners, except the bursts had occurred 13 minutes before scanners were activated. Work orders listed the cause as general technical failure with a subcategory for unexpected diplomatic feedback. The Institute's mainframe automatically generated 6 backup copies of the incident report, 3 of which immediately encrypted themselves with Terran naval ciphers. Access logs showed these files had been created 17 seconds before the confrontation, a quirk the IT department blamed on temporal synchronization anomalies, rather than admit their systems had been pre-writing reports before events occurred. Kai's student profile now cycled randomly between 7 authentication levels whenever accessed. Attempts to revoke her clearance triggered station-wide alerts about unauthorized academic restriction, complete with automatic appeals filed to the ANME, Interstellar Education Board. Records showed these protocols had been installed during a routine system update the same day she enrolled. As dusk cycle commenced across the station's viewports, 3 unmarked shuttles departed from maintenance airlocks, their transponders, broadcasting civilian codes, their trajectories aligning neatly with the Terran stealth fleet's last known positions. The docking clamps registered their mass as precisely matching that of standard supply deliveries, assuming one ignored the faint residual signatures of high-grade military alloys. Hooksmar's after-action report totaled 147 pages, with 17 redacted sections that somehow still leaked into embassy gossip networks. His concluding assessment labeled the incident academic interactions producing unexpected but legally irreproachable outcomes, bureaucratic code for "we got played" and "I can't prove how." The document's metadata contained tracking pixels that later surfaced in human intelligence training seminars. Velen spent the next semester on sabbatical, ostensibly to revise his xenobiology curriculum. His drafts included new chapters on asymmetrical, physiological advantages, and cultural misdirection strategies, though publishers insisted on softening the titles. Students noted his lectures now avoided all human-related topics except behind blast-proof plexiglass. The Institute's next cultural exchange guidelines included a curious addendum about demonstration equipment limitations, specifically banning compliance field generators within 50 meters of human enrollees. This seemed arbitrary until engineers discovered residual harmonics in the damaged units matching Terran neural augmentation frequencies. Security patrols began routine scans for lost hair ties and water bottles after discovering 17 species, compulsively checking these items for hidden functions. The station's lost and found log showed a 400% increase in abandoned writing utensils, all inexplicably formatted to human grip specifications. And far below the administrative offices, a single janitorial drone scrubbed at an odd stain near Kai's former seat. Its chem sensors identified traces of Vorak stress pheromones, hegemony combat stimulants, and, inexplicably, very high-quality Earl Grey tea. The work order simply read, "Sanitization Protocol, Diplomatic Residue," with a parenthetical note about recommended elbow pad upgrades for all cleaning staff. The Galactic Institute's next semester featured revised xenobiology curriculum, now including human tactical deception Volonwanris as core reading. Required viewing. Security footage of a single human student dismantling a professor's worldview without standing up. 3 Terran ships winked out like closing eyes, their presence no longer necessary. Flight logs showed no unauthorized maneuvers, just polite observational orbits ending precisely as scheduled. Earth's probationary status underwent re-evaluation by a panel suddenly very invested in human cultural studies. The review board's new chair wore elbow pads. Elsewhere, 17 embassies revised their harmless species lists. The updates mostly involved moving humans from Appendix B, minor nuisances, to Appendix Q, do not provoke. Kai's grades posted, normally. Her course evaluations included one anonymous note, demonstrates exceptional grasp of applied psychology. The handwriting matched Valen's. The Trilk's secondary eyes rotated towards Kai's notebook. Their species could decode molecular structures from casual sketches. What they saw made 3 of their stomachs invert. The schematic wasn't just accurate. It included marginal notes on field harmonics that would let someone bypass 17 patents with a well-placed fork. Over at the security station, 5 different panic buttons were receiving simultaneous pressure from various appendages. Protocol demanded lockdown for uncontrolled neurological phenomena, but the system kept rejecting inputs because nobody had thought to include one unimpressed mammal in the threat matrix. The AI settled for playing calming whale songs, which only deepened the Vorak's existential crisis. Kai cracked her knuckles. The sound traveled further than it should have in a room full of hyper-advanced auditory organs. 27 different threat assessment protocols quietly updated themselves to flag that particular human mannerism as probable prelude to institutional regret. The compliance field generator chose that moment to eject its primary crystal. The component bounced twice before rolling to a stop at Kai's feet. Institute equipment wasn't designed to sustain that much reciprocated indifference. Later investigations would determine the failure cascaded from a simple overheating issue, assuming you classified attempting to break a species that considers full marathons light cardio as simple. Velen's implant chose that exact moment to ping him with an update from the Xenobiology Review Board. The subject line read, Revised Threat Classifications, which would have been useful 40 minutes earlier. His retinal display helpfully highlighted the human entry, now amended with a footnote. Note: neurological compliance measures may exhibit reduced efficacy. Suggested alternatives: bribery, respectful negotiation, not being a dick. Kai pocketed the field crystal. The movement didn't even qualify as furtive by human standards, just the casual larceny of a being whose ancestors stole fire from gods, and called it a Tuesday. 6 custodial drones twitched in their charging ports, their object tracking algorithms overwhelmed by something so blatant happening at walking speed. The room's emergency protocols finally settled on activating the sprinkler system. This worked exactly as well as expected when dealing with a species that evolved on a planet where water fell from the sky for fun. Kai held up her pad to shield her notes. Her expression suggested she'd done this before, possibly during actual artillery fire. Institute regulations required instructors to log all equipment malfunctions. Velen's report would later include the phrase, behavioral conditioning measures proved incompatible with subjects' apparent evolutionary history of surviving stupider environments. The review committee circled it in red and wrote, accurate, per incident footage in the margin. The Nimbus beings had by this point condensed into their threat reduction form a floating sphere so dense it bent light around it. Kai glanced at them while wiping water off her schematics. They pulsed once in what might have been greeting or surrender. Galactic diplomacy experts are still debating which. Somewhere in the building's lower levels, 3 Terran diplomats paused their negotiations to check chronometers. Their smiles didn't change, but the Deltrix ambassador later reported noticing a strange synchronicity in their blinking patterns, right as the sprinklers activated upstairs. The incident report would diplomatically omit this detail under the heading Cultural Sensitivities. Back in the lecture hall, the Vorak were experiencing something unprecedented in their predatory lineage performance anxiety. Their claws kept extending and retracting like malfunctioning umbrellas. None of their hunting songs covered what to do when prey sat calmly through what should have been a soul-crushing display of dominance. One started quietly humming a human pop song it picked up from intercepted broadcasts. Kai closed her notebook, with a snap that made every translator implant in the room hiccup. The sound carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken, actuallys. Institute recorders caught the exact moment Valen's posture shifted from condescending educator to guy who just realized he left the stove on at home. The compliance field generator's exhaust vents made a sound suspiciously like resigned sighing as its core finally cooled. Its last diagnostic message scrolled across the maintenance terminal. Recommend alternative management strategies for subject, Nomura. Further attempts may void warranty. Legal later argued this didn't technically qualify as artificial intelligence, though the custodial staff swore the machine looked relieved when they hauled it away. Kai adjusted her waterlogged hair tie. The simplicity of the gesture cut deeper than any threats. Here was a being whose species treated apocalyptic scenarios as minor inconveniences, now mildly annoyed about damp stationery. The Trilk ambassador's carapace plates would take weeks to unclench. Velen's datapad beeped with an incoming message from the dean's office. The preview read, Revised syllabus for probationary species interactions. Attached was a single image, the cover of a Terran children's book called Why You Shouldn't Poke Bears. The timestamp showed it had been sent 11 minutes before. Class began. The classroom's AI announced it was distributing electronic copies of the liability waiver update. 47 students immediately forwarded it to their legal teams. Kai signed hers without looking, her signature identical to the one on file despite the system's attempts to verify it through 17 biometric checks. Humans had been forging official documents since we invented clay tablets. Far above the Institute, 3 unregistered ships adjusted their orbits by 0.03 degrees. The movement didn't trigger any alerts, just standard station keeping against microgravity fluctuations. Their positions now framed the lecture hall's observation windows perfectly. Coincidence, of course. Much like how Kai's notebook happened to include spec sheets on the exact model of compliance field generator guarding the system's embassies. The sprinklers finally shut off with a sound like the galaxy's longest eye roll. Water dripped from the holographic Earth projection, making continents shimmer in ways that almost looked like someone winking. Kai checked her chronometer. 3 minutes until the Institute's mandatory hydration break. She stretched, just a mammal working out the kinks, and 17 students recoiled like she'd drawn a sword. Velen's implant pinged again. New research from the Xenophysiology lab. The attached paper's title loosely translated to, So About Those Redundant Human Nerve Clusters. He minimized it without reading. Some revelations could wait until after the Academy's insurance premiums updated. The custodial drones finally rebooted and began sopping up water. Their object avoidance algorithms kept them 3 meters from Kai at all times, a programming quirk the work order system would later classify as unsolicited but prudent. At the back of the room, one of the younger hive queens surreptitiously Googled human nervous system adaptations. Her search history would later become Exhibit A in the class action lawsuit against the Institute's outdated xenobiology curriculum. The top result from the Terran Scientific Archives opened with the phrase, So you've tried electroshock conditioning and it backfired spectacularly. Velen's demand for active participation came with the particular brand of smirk that made even the lecture hall's AI wince. Back on his homeworld, the gesture had evolved to intimidate prey species just before they bolted into conveniently placed kill zones. Given humanity's probationary status, he expected at minimum some satisfying squirming, maybe a whimper if he upped the wattage on his ceremonial gauntlets. Kai Nomura rose with the unhurried calm of someone who'd been counting, down to this exact moment. Her fingers closed around the professor's wrist with the quiet precision of a locksmith disabling an alarm. The touch registered as technically non-threatening by Institute sensors. 0 psi over ambient pressure, about the same force you'd use to steady an overfilled coffee cup. Velen's carapace plating should have rendered the grip meaningless. The chitinous layers that shrugged off plasma bolts and industrial laser cutters made human digits roughly as effective as feather dusters against military-grade armor. His species' evolutionary records showed exactly 3 instances where their nerve clusters had even registered below elbow contact from soft-bodied organisms. Each case ended with digestive enzymes. The room learned something new in the 0.3 seconds before Velen's arm dropped. Kai's thumb found the gap between radial shielding plates, a space measuring precisely 1.3 millimeters when relaxed, and applied pressure at a 27-degree angle. Textbook human technique. Problem was, the textbook in question had been published by the Intergalactic Xenobiology Council, with exactly zero consultation from actual pressure point specialists. Their diagrams of non-critical neural junctures bore the same relationship to reality as a child's crayon sketch of a fusion reactor. The Galactic Institute's lecture hall was packed with alien intelligences, each more formidable than the last. But when Professor Vallin sneered, "Humans," as if the word itself was a curse, one student didn't flinch. Kai Nomura sat quietly, her calm masking a secret the galaxy wasn't ready for. What happened next would shatter every assumption about humanity's place in the cosmos. The lecture hall wasn't just diverse. It was a carefully curated display of galactic dominance designed to reinforce protocols written by beings who hadn't evolved opposable thumbs. Professor Vellin's podium overlooked 14 species that could crush human bone like dry kindling, another 7 that dissolved organic matter for fun, and at least 3 energy beings who could recite every war crime your ancestors committed before breakfast. His lesson plan projected behind him in 7-dimensional holography, the Earth marker pulsing yellow under probationary status. The accompanying species summary read like a restaurant 1-star review. Biologically unremarkable, limited genetic diversity. Weapons technology outpaced social development. Notable traits, persistence, possibly pathological. The Vorak forms in the front row chittered when the display zoomed in on Pleistocene-era spearheads. Their mandibles vibrated at the exact frequency Vellin's smirk suggested was appropriate for apex predators who still fought over petroleum. Nobody laughed when the feed switched to satellite images of stealth bombers, just a collective blink from the hive queens that translated roughly to galactic eye roll. Kai Nomura sat in predator blind spot seating, 3rd row center, where the acoustics guaranteed every whisper about fragile epidermis and alarming caffeine dependency carried clearly. Her datapad showed the schematics for a Type 7 neural disruptor. This was technically allowed under Institute rules, provided the viewer wasn't from a species that had recently been downgraded from threat to nuisance classification. The Trilk ambassadors shifted carapace plates in a tactical pattern. Their species had once waged war over a comma in a trade agreement. Now they watched Kai's human fingers. No claws, no retractable blades, just standard-issue keratin tapped the pad's screen with infuriating calm. Evolutionary biology modules across the galaxy failed to account for mammals who weaponized boredom. Vellin adjusted his mantle, an affectation from his homeworld scholar-predator caste, and highlighted a subheading, Notable Survival Anomalies. The attached footage showed 20th century humans outrunning wildfires. The Nimbus entities in the back pulsed disapprovingly. Their atmospheric composition made them experts in regrettable combustion events. One of the hegemony warriors cracked a spinal ridge in anticipation. Their battle hymn spoke of glorious combat, not whatever this was, an academic demonstration, where the subject kept sipping electrolyte fluid instead of fleeing. Galactic conflict resolution software had no protocols for opponents who took notes. Kai's student profile hovered in the attendance matrix between a plasma-based life form and something that photosynthesized rage. Her threat assessment read, Observation, Diplomacy Track. No prior incidents. The system flagged this as 98% accuracy. The remaining 2% margin of error was currently recalculating. The Vorak nearest the podium extruded a secondary set of claws, standard procedure during lectures on inferior species. A show of dominance their psychology texts claimed, reassured less evolved creatures about their place in the hierarchy. Nobody mentioned it also gave humans 9 extra seconds to locate exits when the claws got stuck in the furniture. Phelan refreshed the hologram with what he clearly considered a mic drop. Comparative density scans of human femurs versus those of even-toed ungulates. The subtext being that Earth's self-proclaimed dominant species had skeletons roughly as resilient as interstellar livestock. The hologram helpfully labeled both specimens prey morphology. Kai's pad beeped. The sound echoed, a quaint terrestrial notification that drew more stares than the professor's diagrams of human fight-or-flight responses. Institute recorders later confirmed she was reviewing schematics of the hall's security systems. At no point did her pupils dilate beyond baseline mammalian parameters. The hive queens exchanged pheromones in a sequence that loosely translated to "Are we being trolled?" Their species had once glassed continents over less subtle power plays. Now they watched a human female adjust her hair tie, while their own warrior drones twitched with secondhand social discomfort. Velan concluded his presentation with obligatory footage of early spaceflight failures, a montage of exploding rockets, set to what he probably considered ironic classical music. The gallery lights brightened just enough to make every species' discomfort visible, except Kai's. Hers remained perfectly calibrated for reading fine print on liability waivers. The attack happened 17 seconds later. Not that anyone would call it that initially. Institute regulations defined attack as requiring intent, weapons discharge, or at least one severed limb. What Kai did technically qualified as participatory pedagogy under subsection 4A. This was before the screaming started. Velan activated the neural compliance field with the practiced flick of someone who'd spent years watching weaker species crumple at the touch of a button. The device chirped its startup sequence 3 ascending notes that usually coincided with student postures slumping into textbook submission stances. Institute manuals called this harmonized behavioral alignment. Everyone else called it not. Getting sued when the Tarnak exchange students tried to eat the teaching assistants again. The field generator's specs glowed helpfully on the wall display. 4,200 species, 100% efficacy, safety certified for use on pregnant queens, quantum state intelligences, and anything else dumb enough to challenge galactic classroom management protocols. The Vorak in the front row instinctively lowered their secondary claws, a conditioned response from that time one of them tried to smuggle in contraband synaptic enhancers. Kai blinked. The single most expensive piece of behavioral control, technology outside military installations, had just washed over her nervous system like bad cafeteria music. Her fingers kept sketching something that looked suspiciously like the field generator's internal schematics. The Nimbus entities flickered in their containment fields, their usual reaction to unexpected neurological events, which made the emergency lighting pulse in time with Velan's rising blood pressure. The professor jabbed the intensity dial straight to level 7. This was technically against manufacturer guidelines, same way flamethrowers weren't licensed for toddler birthday parties. The field's hum climbed 2 octaves, a sound most species experienced as their ancestors screaming in their bones. Several hive queens activated emergency pheromone filters. The Trilk ambassador's carapace plates locked into defensive formation with a series of clicks that translated roughly to, "Oh, this isn't in the lesson plan." Kai turned a page in her notebook. The motion triggered the Vorak's prey gland response. They'd literally evolved to salivate at sudden movements, except their digestive tracts were currently too busy questioning life choices to function properly. Institute records would later show the compliance field spiking at 147% of recommended output, enough to make a Tarnak warlord weep for his mother. The readouts helpfully noted the human subject's vitals remained within baseline parameters for sedentary academic activity. Velan's third attempt involved both hands on the console and what sounded like a prayer in his native tongue. The generator, obliged by tripping every failsafe from here to the comet belt. Warning glyphs spiraled across the ceiling in 17 languages, all variations of "maybe don't." The classroom's AI politely announced it was contacting their legal department in anticipation of litigation. Kai sipped her water. The cup's condensation left a perfect ring on her datapad, a trivial detail that became galaxy-breaking when the security feeds were reviewed later. Humans weren't supposed to have that kind of fine motor control under neurological assault. Then again, they also weren't supposed to metabolize the Institute's universal sedative, coffee substitute, which explained why 3 of the custodial drones were currently passed out near the snack dispenser. The field generator's cooling vents whined like a dying starship. One of the Nimbus beings extruded a distress filament, their version of calling the manufacturer's customer service line. A holographic disclaimer flickered to life above the smoking unit. Results not guaranteed when used on species exhibiting abnormal pain tolerance or what the fuck is wrong with you. Nobody was entirely sure which intern had programmed that message. Velan's mantle flushed aggressive purple. the exact shade his people used when realizing they'd grossly misclassified something in the food chain. His data pad helpfully displayed, Kai's medical waiver. Subject possesses standard human nociceptive pathways. The footnote clarified this meant she could feel pain just fine. She simply chose not to dignify certain stimuli with a response.